So namaste and hello. This is Padma Kuppa. It's a state representative for Troy and Clawson here on our next episode of Faith and Politics. Today, I have a very special guest, my friend and mentor and proud Catholic and also interfaith leader here in Metro Detroit, who has been teaching at U of D Mercy and also been very active in helping develop an interfaith leadership council, Mr. Bob Bruttell. Bob, I gave a little bit about you if you want to tell our listeners a little bit more and what brings you to faith and politics, policy that puts people first. Thank you so much for joining me.
Well, Padma, I'm very happy to be with you and to acknowledge our friendship over many years. I'm honored for you to say that I am somehow a mentor of yours. I think that much of what I know about the Dharmic religions has come from you over these last, maybe going on 25 years. It's at least 20. It's an honor to be with you this morning. In a thumbnail, I think you've given my credentials. I would add to that I'm retired and spent almost 50 years running and owning construction companies. So besides my interest in the community and interfaith work, I have had an abiding interest in building things over my almost 50-year career. So I think that you could probably find in our discussion something of my desire to build things and to find ways of adding to our community in some substantial form, right? Not just as a kind of social worker, but as somebody who likes to see concrete things built. And organizations like the Interfaith Leadership Council that I've had a hand in contributing to, I see as a substantial, a stabilizing kind of organization within the community, in a community that constantly has to have discussions about community values. So that's a little more about me and the way I approach the world.
Yeah, that kind of grounds my first question, which is, that I was very involved in community building and bringing people together to find common ground, both in the cultural and diversity is a given. Inclusion is something that takes effort. So bringing that common ground and bringing people together across diversity, but also in the religious space, as we started the Troy Area Interfaith Group in 2005, and also to my other work with Wisdom and the Interfaith Leadership Council, where we want to bring pluralism into the religious space to build interfaith dialogue. This has been sort of my ideal, to be very bipartisan and to bring that pluralism as an ideal into the political space, because it's a recognition and affirmation of diversity within our political body. And to maybe see if we could put policy together that meets the needs of the diverse people across Michigan. Do you mind speaking to this ideal of pluralism and how you have been working towards it and how it informs the work you do in the interfaith space?
Sure. Well, I start to answer the question from a historical point of view, because as you mentioned, I teach at the University of Detroit Mercy, and I teach, as I often say, history in the religious studies department. Pluralism is a fact in America. We have been a country that had started right with its encounters with the Native Americans who were on the American continents before Europeans showed up. And so right from the beginning, there has been an absolute requirement that that the Europeans newly in the Americas and the natives who had been here before they got around to it had to have some sort of a relationship. And of course, if you're aware of that history over the long haul, we can see that it has not necessarily been a good relationship. But nevertheless, the pluralism has always been part of what we've had to deal with in America, with all the various ethnic groups, and those ethnic groups often have religious identities. And so then we've had to deal with the fact that we have, a number of different worldviews. And certainly those worldviews were as contentious among people who nominally all called themselves Christians as they are among people who were of very different understandings of their faith, such as Muslims and Hindus and so on. So pluralism is a fact, and American pluralism, we often try to say, is an attempt to take all of those various voices and ways of looking at the world and have them have some sort of a common understanding that is not tribal, but based on an idea. And one of those really strong ideas was set forth by Jefferson and Franklin and Adams and so on in the founding document for the country, where they made the claim that all men were created equal. And we've been struggling with that idea that there's an equality among humanity that should supersede everything, that should be positively recognized as a part of the way the way the world was created by God. And so despite the fact that that struggle is ongoing and is rocky, as I say often, it's a rocky attempt to live up to that ideal. That ideal of American pluralism is informed by something else that we call the American Creed, the idea that we are required by our understanding of God to find ways of working together and being one, the idea of e pluribus unum, out of many one. There's, I could continue. So one of the most interesting things about America is that we have this active attempt not to be tribal, and to recognize that there's a community of values out there where people come together and in a atmosphere of respect, they express themselves. And I would say that the most political thing I could say to you this morning is that there is a serious attempt right now in the country among way too many people to abandon that way of looking at things, to abandon what in politics, in our political lives, is called democracy, but in our faith lives is called respect for one another, listening to each other's voices, belonging. Those are things that are part of our faith lives and are, very difficult ethics to live up to. But nevertheless, we're expected to live up to them. I do not, will not presume to be able to say anything in depth about your dharmic paths, except to say that there are a lot of dharmic paths that I have observed, and that those paths seem to me to be the kinds of things that Christian people talk about, being positive ideals, difficult paths to take, expectations that that there's a presence of God in the world that should be expressed, and we seem to have gotten to some sort of a point right now where what you and I would call interfaith values and what politics would call democracy is under siege. It's actually kind of hard to imagine how strongly it looks like some others wish to not only abandon that idea of democracy, but to oppose democracy. And that's going to get us, and has actually, I think, gotten us into a lot of trouble.
Yeah, that is one of the challenges of our time, is the disinformation that's out there, that lends itself to a undermining of democracy, as you say. But I think it's staying true to our pursuit of common ground and of pluralism, and seeing each other as people, and as of people of faith and no faith, which is what America's promise is all about in its First Amendment. I think we have to still strive for policy that is at its core pluralistic. Taking a pivot, I actually want to talk about something that you and I both care about very much, and that is the pursuit of justice in this very beautiful state of ours. It's something that we've been involved with through a common organization, the Michigan Roundtable for Diversity and Inclusion, which brought to my attention a movie about the Native Americans here, the indigenous people of Michigan, through a movie called The Fires That Burn. Do you remember this? And so I know that this summer, there's going to be a totem pole that travels across the country. It's already started from the West Coast about the Enbridge pipeline and the spills and the places where these pipelines have infringed on sacred lands of the indigenous populations across the country. And so just from understanding the different traditions that you have, as you said, you've been exposed to the dharmic tradition, not only through me, but through others within the Jain, Sikh, and Buddhist and Hindu communities here in Southeastern Michigan, and from your own Christian Catholic tradition, as well as other denominations and religions. You've seen the call to protect our natural resources and our environment. I don't know if you know, but I introduced policy recently to improve our EV infrastructure, electric vehicle infrastructure, because I think that electric vehicles are one way of lessening our impact on the environment by reducing our use of fossil fuels. From your own exposure, can you speak to this ideal of protecting the environment as being stewards of the environment? You know that Professor Annalise Sinnott at Ecumenical Theological Seminary, the first class I took was with her, and she made me aware of an organization called the Evangelical Environmental Network. Creationcare.org is their website. But I know that you have a vast amount of knowledge, more than me, on this, of who's out there doing what they're doing to advocate from a faith space on caring for the environment.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. You mentioned that I am a practicing Catholic, and one of the areas where I'm proud that I'm Catholic is the fact that this current Pope Francis, has taken a great interest in the environment and wrote what we call an encyclical, or a small book on the subject of the environment and the requirement for everyone, not just Catholics, to protect the environment. This is an area of really potential contention that is not just over the pipeline in the Straits of Mackinac, and not just over the fact that Native Americans might have a different view of how to protect the environment than those in the energy industry might have. It really concerns us all, and I just was reading recently about something that's going to that I'll have to struggle with, and so I'm going to need support from others to help me understand how to deal with that. Two issues of the environment. One is that raising the industry of livestock raising for meat is one of the huge contributors to global warming. And I had no knowledge up until a month or so ago of how big a player or how big a part the livestock industry plays in global warming, much larger than you would imagine. And another area, and so the question and the pressures there are, how do we wean ourselves off of meat, which you and many folks who are have done that already may be able to teach me how to do that. And we need that kind of a voice in the community showing us the way. Another thing that might end up troubling me directly is the fact that they say that we need to wean ourselves off the use of natural gas completely and go to an electric world. So it's easy for me to say that that the auto industry ought to figure out how to deal with the fact that they have these gas guzzling vehicles that use petroleum fuels. They need to figure that out. They need to figure out what kind of a network we can have where we can fill those vehicles up with electricity where necessary and where we want to be. But it's another for me to say, well, I'm going to have to transfer over the various devices I have in my home that that use natural gas, and that's going to cost me some money to do that, et cetera, et cetera. So we all have to find the values within our own faith traditions or from a perspective of humanism to deal with these kinds of changes that we are convinced will benefit the whole community. I, as a Christian, also read the Hebrew texts, and the Hebrew texts are the scriptures of the Jewish people. Start out right in Genesis with a story about how God has created the world and it was good. And that we as humanity were given a world where we are the stewards. And sometimes that word steward is translated or is thought of as controlling. And being a steward doesn't necessarily mean controlling. Being a steward is more like being a parent, where you give values to your children and offer them opportunities to grow and thrive and flourish, and they are independent. And so that's similar to the environment. The environment needs to be given the full ability that we Christians may say that God created, and to flourish, and to thrive. That it's not necessarily supposed to be molded in a human image, where we eliminate anything that we aren't comfortable with, get rid of any land that looks in a sense unproductive, right? All land has to be used in some way instead of existing. And this has been a problem in our relationship historically with Native Americans, where Native Americans had a concept of how land was to be present in their lives, but it didn't have to be agricultural. It didn't have to be somehow, planted in some way. Our own U.S. State Senator Lewis Cass, who was the Michigan State Senator at the time when Jackson was removing the Indians through the Indian Removal Act, and Cass said, "Well, they don't deserve to have that land. They don't deserve to have it because they don't produce anything on it," which actually, in fact, was not true. The what so-called civilized Native Americans, the civilized Indians, were definitely farmers. So even in that, he was wrong. But that concept that somehow Europeans use land and make it productive, rather than a sense of the land existing and providing beauty and benefit to us as human beings in a world that would be so impoverished if we eliminate nature, as we sometimes seem to be doing. So my own faith is bolstered by what our leader, the Pope Francis, has said about the environment. And as I read the scriptures, both the Jewish scriptures and the scriptures called the Gospels, I find that there's no room in those documents for a kind of rapacious understanding of what humanity's place in the world is or should be. And it worries me greatly. I have grandchildren, and I think that unless we take on a view of caring for the environment as a part of our worldview, as a part of our core values, we are going to leave an awful place potentially for my granddaughters.
Thank you. That kind of leads me to one of my last questions, which has to do with wealth and inequity and wealth distribution. I often use the sentence, "We're robbing Peter to pay Paul," about our state budget. I do not sit on the appropriations committees or subcommittees. I sit on policy committees. But a lot of what we do in the state is we determine how the state's revenues, which are from people paying taxes, how those then are distributed to the various things that we believe are part of the common good: our water infrastructure, our roads, our municipal governments, our schools, and other things that are what I consider part of the American way of life. But does our policy exacerbate income inequity? And how do we speak of justice, the word dharma I use in Sanskrit, and fairness, that's also part of both our common value in our faith traditions, that we are fair, and not asking the widow to pay more than her fair share, as Gospel of Mark, that last verse, the last verses in there where Jesus is asked all those questions, but then he comes back and he asks his own, and one of them is around, why are we asking the widow to pay more than her fair share? So do you want to just talk to that as a common value and how you see it as an interfaith leader, as well as from your own tradition?
Sure. So Padma, it's fascinating because every time we have a discussion, you and I and others, things come up that immediately intrigue me, and I want to know more about them, how to understand. You are aware of many of the Christian values, and in more depth than most people, I think, even some Christians. And I'm fascinated with the various dharmic paths and how you would look at those things. and there's a kind of sharing in that, right? There's a kind of immediate desire on our part to know more, and maybe to exceed the boundaries of the time that we set for this phone call this morning, this podcast. The idea of sharing, I think, is huge. The early Christians, had a community where they radically shared everything. And there's been many examples where Christians have tried to live out a life of sharing. We have religious orders of women and men who take vows of poverty and share everything they get with one another, and take their surplus and care for others with that surplus. That is one of the examples of the difficult ethics that religious groups pose for us. Religious groups always say, and Christianity is no less among them, always say that you have work to do in order to live up to, in full, to these values that have been set out by your religion. So the idea of sharing, I live in a family where we all share, but my sharing beyond that is much more limited. But we really live in a community where sharing is a requirement in some way, shape, or form. And we need a value that underpins that we will, with some courage, and kind of get each of us to participate in. I'm told in something I read recently, for instance, that George Romney, who was the CEO of American Motors, years ago, lived during a time when he and other economic leaders like him would refuse their bonuses because they felt that it was excessive, that it gave the wrong message to others, that their bonuses should not be that wealthy. They were already being paid what others might call a fantastic salary in the first place. And so George Romney gave us an example of what a civic and economic leader, how he might take in his case, he was a Latter-day Saints member, a Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints member, or what we sometimes call a Mormon. He took it, that's the way he understood his Mormon values, is that he needed to not take more than his share of the wealth. I'm not sure we have that kind of understanding among faith leaders, among economic and business leaders these days, or anyone for that matter, that there's a sense of sharing. But certainly all of our faiths, I haven't found one yet that doesn't require sharing, that doesn't require a sense of mutual responsibilities or shared responsibilities. That should take precedence over a kind of rights-based, absolute libertarian sense of, I got mine, you figure out how to get yours. And you're right in the midst of that as a policymaker. You're trying to help us live up to our highest and best values, and share and allow belonging to everyone, not just inclusion, but belonging. And belonging requires some economic resources. It requires that that even those who have limited resources be able to have transportation, an environment that has clean air and clean water, and those things take funds. And you can only get those funds from the source of where the money is. If Willie Sutton can say that he robbed banks because that's where the money is, it's a foolish enterprise to think that you can support the resources that are needed for a community without going where the money is. And so we have to look to our richest corporations. We have to look to those people who have well more than they need to live their own lives. We have to look to the middle class too. Those are the places where you can find resources to support the wider community. And the reason to do that is because we are required by our faiths to share and to have a mutual respect for the things that cause human beings to thrive and to live lives of quiet enjoyment.
Thank you so much. You just set me on a quest in my mind. As I was listening to you, I was also thinking about what are the stories that speak to sharing in my religious tradition, and how I'm going to seek those out after I get through my daily activities. But I think that is that idea, or that concept of radical sharing, is part of my dharma. And how do I be better at sharing as a person, as a policymaker? And so I really appreciate your taking the time to have these conversations with me about faith and politics, and how we can make policy that puts people first, rooted in the wide range of faith and no faith that all Americans and all Michiganders represent. Thank you so much, Bob, for doing this. And I look forward to maybe having another conversation about the things that the Interfaith Leadership Council of Metropolitan Detroit is doing, and how we can continue to engage and advocate for policies that put people first.
Well, thank you, Padma. I enjoyed being with you. It was a pleasure, and we will always try to continue these discussions. So thank you very much.
Yeah.